There, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Tuesday, the 10th of January.
Postal pressure. Ministers are scrambling to piece together a solution to quash the convictions of hundreds of wrongly convicted postmasters. Mr. Nobody. The Labour leader accuses Rishi Sunak of flip-flopping over the government's Rwanda plan ahead of next week's dramatic showdown. The Prime Minister hit back, accusing Sir Keir Starmer of prioritising people smugglers ahead of the British people.
Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer has accused Rishi Sunak of being Mr. Nobody. And, of course, Rishi Sunak hit back. But that's not all. Winter weather warning. The Met Office is, of course, warning that freezing temperatures will be across the United Kingdom, warning more than ice, snow and slippery conditions. But of course, the big story that has broken within the last hour is that compensation announcement for sub-postmasters. £600,000 is the starting amount that they will now be entitled to. All they'll have to do is sign a declaration saying they were wrongly convicted.
Now, what we've heard in the last hour is that the Prime Minister has announced new legislation which will quash the convictions of hundreds of postmasters. And in the last few minutes, the Post Office Minister, Kevin Hollerake, has been speaking. And he says that this move is an exceptional step in exceptional circumstances. And what postmasters will now have to do is sign a statement, sign a piece of paper. He says that is not foolproof. There could be some guilty, really guilty people caught up in this. It's not foolproof, but it is proportionate, and there is a need to act quickly and decisively here.
And the idea of this piece of paper is that this is a piece or a line of truth. And if any postmaster has lied about that, who actually did commit fraud, well, they will be liable to then be charged, investigated and potentially sent to prison off the basis of that. It's a safety mechanism.
Yeah, but what an incredible move in the last hour, and all because a drama has galvanised the public and has galvanised the government. Let's get your latest headlines. Here's Sam Francis.
Pip and Tom, thank you very much. Good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. I'm Sam Francis. The headlines at 1. Well, our top story is, of course, that the government is offering an upfront payment of £75,000, which will be made available to hundreds of post office staff. More than 700 sub-postmasters were jailed or bankrupted as a result of the flawed Horizon computer software. Postal Services Minister Kevin Hollinrake has said in the last few minutes that an exceptional step of introducing new legislation is also needed to make sure that victims get the justice they deserve.
We intend to bring forward legislation as soon as we can to overturn the convictions of all those convicted in England or Wales on the basis of post office evidence given during the Horizon scandal. The government will, in the coming days, consider whether to include the small number of cases that have already been considered by the appeal courts and the convictions upheld.
Well, meanwhile, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has said that Rishi Sunak has been caught red-handed, opposing his own Rwanda plan. It comes as the Prime Minister is bracing for a common showdown over his flagship scheme after being warned by some Conservative MPs that it won't work unless it's significantly strengthened. During the first Prime Minister's questions of 2024, Starmer referenced reports that Rishi Sunak wanted to scale back the government's Rwanda scheme when he was Chancellor.
£400 million of taxpayer money down the drain. No one sent to Rwanda. Small boats still coming. It's hardly a surprise he wanted to scrap the scheme when he was trying to sneak in as Tory leader. But he's been caught red-handed opposing the very thing that he's now made his flagship policy. Which member should we listen to? The one before us today or the one who used to believe in something?
But in response, the Prime Minister accused Labour of being against any deterrent.
You do need to have an effective deterrence to finally solve this problem. In fact, the National Crime Agency agree that you need, in their words, an effective removals and deterrence agreement. And that's why, after becoming Prime Minister, I negotiated a new deal with Albania, thanks to which we have seen a 93% drop in illegal arrivals from Albania. That's how Australia stopped the boats. That's why Italy, Germany and Austria are all looking at similar schemes. He's the only one who's opposed to a proper deterrent.
Well, in other news, a Nottinghamshire police constable has been found to be under criminal investigation for possible driving offences. That's following the death of an 80-year-old. A retired photographer, Trevor Bartlett, was hit by a police van during a pedestrian crossing in Nottinghamshire in December. The constable who was driving the van has been accused of causing death by dangerous driving and careless and inconsiderate driving. The officer has also served a gross misconduct notice for potential breaches of the policing standards professional behaviour. That's the latest from the GB Newsroom. I'm Sam Francis. I'll be back with you at the top of the hour. For now, though, back to Tom and Pip.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 6 minutes past 1, and we're talking about the biggest story that has dominated the week. The Post Office scandal, of course, where in the last hour, the Prime Minister and then the Post Office Minister has announced an extraordinary compensation scheme.
Yeah, this is a big development in the last hour. There is going to be a new law which will exonerate, after many years, hundreds of sub-postmasters. And then the Post Office Minister, Kevin Hollinrake, has answered an urgent question in the House of Commons about how it is all going to work and how this compensation issue is going to work. It is, he says, an exceptional step in exceptional circumstances. What you're looking at there is the former boss of the Post Office, Paula Venell, who we know yesterday returned her CBE. Well, let's talk to our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Good afternoon to you, Catherine. There is a lot to go through here, and it is very complicated. But let's start with the headline, first of all, which is that the Prime Minister has announced that the law is going to change so that hundreds of postmasters can have their convictions quashed.
Yes, this is fabulous news, isn't it, for those hundreds of people wrongly convicted of fraud, of stealing, of cooking the books, when in fact they did no such thing. Some people paid with their lives, others had their lives ruined. This is a scandal that has been going on for so long, but finally it seems like some resolution is in sight. So Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, began Prime Minister's questions by announcing that new legislation is going to be brought forward which will effectively quash all of the convictions of these postmasters, and it will also speed up the compensation that they've so long needed and so long deserved. Now, I was in a lobby briefing with journalists, with the Prime Minister's spokesman talking to us immediately after Prime Minister's questions. We asked how long this would take. He said that the legislation they hope will be brought before Parliament within weeks, and their thinking is that all of these convictions should be quashed at some point this year. Now, there have been some concerns raised about the possibility that a tiny number of people might indeed have been guilty of fraud. So they are going to build into this legislation some sort of safeguards to ensure that if it later transpired that any of these postmasters were guilty, they could then be held to account at a later date. Compensation for the GLO postmasters, that's the group litigation orders, basically postmasters such as Alan Bates that didn't have a criminal conviction but nevertheless had horrendous experiences and potentially many £1,000s out of pocket. This legislation will apply across England, Northern Ireland and Wales. It's going to be different in Scotland. They will have a different system there. The Prime Minister's spokesman also asked about Fujitsu and if they should be held to account, and he said that he wasn't going to prejudge the public inquiry that's going on, but did say where culpability is established, people will be held to account, including companies. So certainly leaving the door open for potential action against this big Japanese tech firm that put this faulty computer software into postmasters' offices, which has caused terrible problems.
Catherine, thank you so much for clearing that up. We were listening to some of these numbers flying around, 70,000, 600,000. It seems that those who were convicted and potentially sent to prison, or at least convicted, can get claims starting at £600,000, but those who were not convicted will get claims starting at £70,000, and they can appeal for more.
Yes, that's right. 600,000 is the figure that we expect to be given ultimately to everybody who was convicted. A lot of money. Of course, no amount of money can undo the damage, can it? But I don't think there'll be many people that will think that these people don't deserve that. Now, ultimately, who fits the bill, we don't know. I suspect that the government will pay in the first instance, but it may well be that down the line, after the public inquiry finishes, perhaps they might try to claw back some of that money from Fujitsu. It's difficult, of course, because the company has got dozens and dozens of government contracts. It's completely sort of embedded in our systems, so it's not that easy, but certainly they're very profitable. They make many millions from the taxpayer every year. Also, Paula Venables, she has, of course, given back her CBE. She was boss of the post office when this was coming into delight, though the post office was still very much in denial for many years. She's given that award back. Lots of demands now for her to give the bonuses back as well that she earned in that period, amounting to several £1 million. Again, the Prime Minister's spokesman wouldn't be pushed on that, but let us see what happens. So a really very good day for campaigners, but I just think incredible, isn't it really, that despite the years of campaigning, the years of suffering, the hundreds of articles in the paper, documentaries on the telly, it has taken an ITV docudrama to finally galvanise the government, the powers that be, into action. And something interesting that Stephen Flynn, the leader of the SNP, said, basically he listed not just this, but a catalogue of failures of state, Grenfell Tower, Hillsborough, tainted blood, etc., where victims decades on still have not had justice.
Indeed, Catherine. And also, as we know, this whole scandal involves all the political parties. And at the top of PMQs today, Lee Anderson asked about Sir Ed Davey, the leader of the Lib Dems, and, well, effectively called for his resignation. Ed Davey was Post Office Minister, wasn't he, under the Liberal Democrat Conservative coalition. Now, was Ed Davey in Parliament? And also, did Rishi Sunak answer the question in any shape or form? I don't think he even referenced it, did he?
I think you're quite right, Pip. No, indeed, he didn't. No, Sir Ed Davey was not in House of Commons today. He apparently had originally had a question tabled, but he has had to withdraw that question for personal reasons that I am not privy to. But certainly a lot of discussion about his role in all this. He was Post Office Minister from 2010 to 2012. Of course, there's been over a dozen Post Office ministers during the period that this scandal has been going on for. He's by no means the only one, but he is the most high profile as the leader of a party. Now, again, the Prime Minister's spokesman was asked if the Prime Minister thought that Sir Ed Davey should resign and would not be drawn on that. But of course, it has been pointed out by many people that Ed Davey is generally very quick when there is any whiff of wrongdoing to say that people should resign, and that perhaps he ought to take his own advice. He, of course, is saying that he's absolutely not going to, nor is he going to give back his knighthood. But, you know, he would say that, wouldn't he? So difficult questions for him. But, I mean, only one of many people that there's difficult questions, and still questions about why this CBE was ever given to Paula Vanells in the first place, given that the issues with the Horizon software were known by that time.
Mm. Well, Catherine, thank you so much for opening up the murky world of the lobby and how those questions to the Prime Minister's spokesman work after Prime Minister's questions, getting a view there of all those behind-the-scenes goings-on. Catherine Forster, our political correspondent.
We also want to bring you a statement from Fujitsu, who was behind that faulty IT system. They've released these words, their response to its part in the scandal. The current Post Office Horizon IT statutory inquiry is examining complex events stretching back more than 20 years. Fujitsu has apologised for its role in their suffering.
Well, coming up, we'll have the latest on those attacks in the Red Sea after it emerged that Royal Naval vessel HMS Diamond had done her part in repelling Houthi attacks. Should the UK be getting involved in this conflict? This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Britain, and welcome back. The crisis in the Red Sea is heating up as the UK and US repel the largest ever attack by Iranian-backed Houthi rebels.
Posting on social media, Defence Secretary Grant Shapps says that the Royal Navy Air Defence destroyer HMS Diamond shot down multiple attack drones heading for commercial vessels. Luckily, there were no injuries or damage to the Diamond or her crew.
Joining us with more on this is our security editor, Mark White. Good afternoon, Mark. Now, all this has happened just hours ahead of the UN Security Council potentially voting to condemn these rebel attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea.
Yeah, there have been, including this attack last night, 26 separate attacks by Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen, targeting, according to the Houthis, ships that are linked to Israel transiting through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. Now, this is according to the Houthi rebels, but I think some of the links to Israel are tenuous at best. And we know that this attack last night involved 18 attack drones and 3 missiles that were fired towards commercial shipping and towards, it seems, HMS Diamond, that Type 45 air defence destroyer out there as part of that sort of maritime policing role in the Red Sea as well. Diamond itself, we were given some still images from the Ministry of Defence showing the situation from the bridge with those members of the bridge crew in their anti-flash gear as the missiles, Sea Viper missiles, were fired towards these attack drones. And we're told that 7 attack drones were taken out by HMS Diamond. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supercarrier, was in the Red Sea as well, along with 3 other US naval vessels that also participated in the operation to take those attack drones and those missiles out of action. Now, you were mentioning there the Defence Secretary Grant Shapps. He has been speaking in the last hour, and he again issued a warning to those Houthi rebels.
We have, I'm afraid, failed to heed the warnings issued on the 3rd of January. We seem to see a drop-off after that by a number of different countries, including the UK and the US. for them to stop and to cease this action. But I'm afraid last night proved they really are not listening. If this doesn't stop, then action will be taken. So I'm afraid that I suppose the simplest thing is to say, watch this space.
Well, the UK is bolstering its defence in that area, in the Red Sea. HMS Richmond, a Type 23 frigate, is en route to the Red Sea as we speak to help reinforce HMS Lancaster, another Type 23 frigate, and HMS Diamond, who are out there at the moment.
Mark, it's impossible to overstate how important the Red Sea shipping route is, how important the Suez Canal is. We can all remember how many goods were obstructed just for a couple of days when the Ever Given blocked the Suez Canal in March 2021. If ships have to reroute and can't go through the Suez Canal, have to go all the way around Africa to get from the Far East to the UK and Europe, that has significant cost of living effects for people living in this country.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's a key route, as you say, transit route from Asia to the West through the Suez Canal there. And if they have to go around Africa, the Horn of Africa, then it adds about 10 days to the trip on average. And that then has the potential net consequence of increasing prices. You've got the likes of oil prices and gas prices that will increase. You've also got supermarket prices that will be affected by this as well. And then there's the issue, of course, of a wider conflict in that region. You've got what's happening out of Yemen, they say, in support of Palestinians in Gaza, but you've also got what Hezbollah are doing in the south of Lebanon, targeting Israel. You've got also Iran-backed groups in Iraq and in Syria. So all the while, real concern about the potential for this conflict widening. And that's why we've got Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, on a visit to the region at the moment. And a big part of that is trying to look for a way forward, looking for some kind of route that allows a de-escalation in Gaza, and the hope being that a de-escalation of Israel's military operation in Gaza will then reduce the tensions. But you're not going to get Israel de-escalating in Gaza until they believe that the job is done in terms of completely eradicating the threat from Hamas, which they certainly haven't done at the moment.
And this UN Security Council vote that's happening later today, Mark, how significant is it? Will it have any effect in reality?
I don't think so, not really. As far as the Houthi rebels in Yemen are concerned, they'll continue to do what they do, you know, with the tacit backing of Iran. So, say they'll continue to. I think the next big question mark really is what this coalition of about a dozen countries, including the US and the UK, do. So far, it's just been defensive engagement with the drones and the missiles that have been fired from these Houthi rebels. Will they now, after more than a week of warnings, because there was a specific threat from the US and the UK just over a week ago, saying that if the Houthis continued with their hostile actions, then they risk military engagement from these Western coalition powers. So I guess we're looking to see what the next step will be. There was a warning again from Grant Shapps today, but no sign as yet of any impending military action.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for bringing us all the latest around that concerning situation, a situation that the Royal Navy has now engaged with. Well, Rishi Sunak announced in the last hour new legislation to exonerate post office victims. The Prime Minister said that people wrongly convicted in the Horizon scandal are swiftly exonerated and compensated. He stressed the importance of that, as he called the scandal one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history.
Now, it all comes as the former Post Office boss, Paula Venables, bowed to huge public pressure, that 1.2 million plus signature petition, to give up her CBE yesterday. But she is also facing calls to return some £3 million in bonuses.
Well, joining us now is Vijay Parekh, a victim of the Post Office scandal. And Vijay, thank you for making the time for us. First of all, your reaction to this announcement of a new law, of a blanket exoneration, and for those that were convicted, automatic compensation starting now at £600,000.
Yeah, I'm glad that they've announced it, but it's of this law. But that the £600,000 they're talking about is not it's just if you don't want to go through the process of going through all your losses, etc. And that's where the £600,000 they're talking about, and that's the max they would give. But there's people who have lost more than just £600,000, their livelihood, etc. That is going to take time.
And Vijay, I think it's important to explain, if you wouldn't mind, to our viewers and listeners what happened to you and how much money you think you have lost over the years.
The rough calculation is going to 7 figures.
Wow.
That's an extraordinary amount of money, Vijay. But I suppose it's not just the monetary sum, the fiscal sum. It's also the human toll. Could you tell us a bit about the effect that this scandal has had on you, your life, your family, your business?
Well, for me, I've lost everything, as I was saying, on the building, mortgage the house as much as I can, but had to move out of the area. And the dignity I had in that area and the whole family they had is gone from all this scandal. Now I'm in a different area, but it's going to take time to recover from this.
Of course it is. And you must be, very, very traumatised, Vijay, as well. And just rewinding a little bit, what were you charged and convicted of?
Charged theft and given 18 months, but that was
spent.
Did
you serve time in prison, Vijay?
Yes, I did.
And how was that, those months that you had to spend in jail, behind bars, convicted of something that you simply did not do?
Horrifying, because of the amount of people are there, and you don't know what they have done, who you're with, and what situation they've been put into prison for. And you're just like a criminal with them at the same time.
It's horrific. Words can't begin to describe what that must have been like. But for you, does today's announcement in Parliament start to put an end to this ordeal that's lasted now for some people 2 decades? Or is there more that you'd like to see the government do?
Quicken up the process of giving the compensation to everyone concerned, because it's just taking too long for people to get compensation. And even after you put your application in, it's going to take longer because it doesn't finish until August, this Horizon inquiry. And when is after the inquiry they start making the figure amount, tallying up, that's going to cause even longer delays after August.
And what would it take, and no doubt it's more than money, for you to find some sort of, to find some sort of justice? It will need more than money, won't it? What else do you want to see happen here?
All the people who are involved in this get the same treatment we have had. All this convicted postmasters and let them feel how we felt.
Would you like to see people imprisoned, VJ, for what has happened?
Yes, I mean, we've done nothing and we've been imprisoned. They have done something, so they need to be imprisoned for the reason what they've done.
Mm.
Well, Vijay, thank you so much for talking us through and going over again that horrific experience that you have faced. And I hope that today has offered a start of some solace and some compensation for you.
Thank you very much.
Vijay Parekh, they're a victim of the post office scandal.
How do you ever get past the fact that you were jailed for 18 months knowing that you'd done absolutely nothing wrong? I don't know how
to
you
move out
survived
of
that
your
experience.
area, the sort of the difference in how people treat you in your own local area.
Well, you become a pariah, don't you, in your own community?
Well, coming up, we'll be joined by our panel to dig deeper into this Horizon IT scandal as the Prime Minister has pledged compensation. But before that, it's your headlines with Sam.
Tom, Pip, thank you very much. Good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. I'm Sam Francis. The headlines at just after 1:30. Well, our top story this hour, the government is offering an upfront payment of £75,000, which will be made available to hundreds of post office staff. As we've been hearing, more than 700 sub-postmasters were jailed, bankrupted or imprisoned as part of a flawed computer system error. Postal Service Minister Kevin Hollinrake says an exceptional step of introducing new legislation is also needed to make sure that victims get the justice they deserve.
We intend to bring forward legislation as soon as we can to overturn the convictions of all those convicted in England or Wales on the basis of post office evidence given during the Horizon scandal. The government will, in the coming days, consider whether to include the small number of cases that have already been considered by the appeal courts and the convictions upheld.
Meanwhile, the Defence Secretary says the UK has helped to repel the largest ever attack by Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in the Red Sea. Overnight, HMS Diamond, along with the US, successfully destroyed multiple attack drones. No crew on that warship have been injured and they haven't suffered any damage. Grant Shapps says the attacks are completely unacceptable and warned there will be consequences. The Yemeni militants have been targeting ships in support of Hamas. A Nottinghamshire police constable is under criminal investigation for possible driving offences following the death of an 8-year-old. A retired photographer, Trevor Bartlett, was hit by a police van on a pedestrian crossing in Nottingham in December. The constable who was driving the van has been accused of causing death by dangerous, careless and inconsiderate driving. The officer has also been served with a gross misconduct notice for potential breaches of police standards for professional behaviour. The estimated cost of building HS2 between London and Birmingham has soared to as much as £66.6 billion. The chairman of the project, Sir John Thompson, told MPs the increase is due to the original budgets being too low, changes to the scope of the project, poor delivery and inflation. In 2013, HS2 was estimated to cost £37.5 billion for the entire planned network. That had included the now scrapped sections from Birmingham to Manchester and Leeds. And as ever, you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a look at the markets this afternoon. The pound will buy you $1.2733 and €1.1629. The price of gold is £1,596.95 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is currently at 7,667 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 20 minutes to 2, and we're discussing the enormous story that has broken in the last hour and a half, the announcement of emergency legislation to exonerate hundreds of wrongly convicted postmasters.
Of course, we want your views and thoughts on this. Alan, good afternoon. You say, how can we be sure that people guilty of being involved in these cases don't get to use post office lawyers or legal aid to defend themselves?
And there's always been a risk that amongst the hundreds of innocent people, there might be 1 or 2 people that are getting exonerated despite having done wrong. Marion says, I earnestly hope that the families of postmasters that have died because of this injustice and are now proved innocent will be included in today's decision.
Absolutely. I'm sure many people endorse that, Marion. Anthony says it's clear that the government intends to claw back the compensation from those who were to blame, but what will be the source of the compensation? Public money, presumably, either directly or indirectly.
And there's no such thing as public money, only taxpayers' money.
And Howard, well, he's having a pop at us journalists, saying, where were all you journalists while this was going on for 20 years? Well, I actually addressed this yesterday on the show, and I said, I think we are all accountable. I think public, the media, the government, I think we're all guilty of not asking searching enough questions and not being persistent and not making a big enough noise about all this, quite frankly.
Although from 2019 we did see a good number of interventions, particularly from local MPs, but also from journalists. Every newspaper and every TV channel has covered this, but it
cut
didn't
through,
have the
it didn't gather momentum.
salience.
And
Yeah.
even you say 2019, this happened a good few years before that.
That's certainly true. That's certainly true. Shall we widen this discussion out now? Joining us on the sofas are the journalist and author Michael Crick and the former Labour Minister Dennis McShane. Michael, why did it take this long to have a blanket exoneration? And is a blanket exoneration really the right path?
Well, why did it take so... I'm not sure I can answer that question about why it took so long. I remember reading Private Eye fortnight after fortnight after fortnight in the early teens, 10 years ago. And the scandal had already been going for a long time even then. And thinking, why is this going on? Why is there nobody in government... Don't people in Whitehall never read the back pages of Private Eye? I know the print's very small, but, I mean, and is nobody sort of saying to the Minister, isn't there something badly wrong going here? And maybe journalists thought it was complicated. It isn't actually that complicated a story, as ITV have shown last week in their absolutely brilliant drama. I mean, there are much more complicated scandal stories than this, like the LIBOR scandal, which is an even just as big, in my view, about city traders who went to jail totally unjustifiably. So I think it's just everybody is at fault in this, including myself, actually. I should have said, when I was reading all this Private Eye stuff, I should be going to Channel 4 News or Newsnight, wherever I was at the time, and you know, kicking up a fuss and say we should be doing this. But because I was a political journalist, I just felt I couldn't take 3 weeks off to do a story that wasn't really on my patch, and I felt, well, it was Private Eye's story, might be accused of stealing their story. But everybody should have kicked up a fuss. And, of course, there were some goodies in this. I mean, people like James Arbuthnot, Tim Farron, you know, David Davis, Priti Patel.
Nadeem Zahawi.
Yeah, even him.
Yes.
Even though he's got stuff in his background that...
but he had the honour of playing himself in that television
I know, I
programme.
thought that was actually a bit tawdry, personally.
Dennis, should we widen this to you? Do you think there was an element that a lot of people in politics thought, oh, this is to do with computers, I don't quite understand it?
It's a classic example of what in the 19th century Hazlitt called the thing that runs Britain. The fashionable word today is the blob. And this was an example of how the blob covers up for itself. Judges didn't do anything. Great journalist Michael Crick didn't do anything. Ex-MPs like me did absolutely be all. Acting MPs didn't do much. It was a bit complicated. It wasn't somebody going to prison for wrongfully accused of killing someone. It was a few thousands of pounds, but that's very lot. They're not well-off people. Come, we know sub-postmasters. And it's to the shame of Britain that our politics cannot deal with what, I hate to use the word, the ordinary man and woman, but the slightly below the exciting level of political problems, and no justice was done.
Michael, far be it from me to sound cynical, but is there any significance in the fact that we are in an election year? Yes, we've had the ITV drama, but we're in an election year and suddenly we've got, oh, we can do this emergency legislation.
I think there is an element, yeah. I think if there hadn't been the urgency about it and the government wanted to clear the decks, as it were, for, you know, just in case they think it's a good idea to go for an election in May, which personally I think would be bonkers and suicidal, but they want to get these things out of the way. And that drama, I mean, I can't think of a drama as powerful as that since Catty Come Home, which was well before either of you were born, from Dennis's time in the 1960s, about the appalling housing crisis and the way it's affected public opinion. Even though the number of viewers was only about 4 million, I think, a night, everybody's talking about it. Is it more than that now?
7 million people
7 million.
It, or certainly watched
or
the first
maybe they're
episode.
catching. You know, everybody's now catching up, and it is, you know, and it's again, and every day the papers have got more than they had the previous day. It's amazing the way this story's taken off. So much injustice, so much, and the way in which watching those programmes, your blood boiled, and you got, and then there were emotional moments when they all got together, and you know, I was in tears just seeing them all clubbing together and actually doing something about it. So I think, but the politics of it, yes. If there was an election, the election wasn't going to be for another 3 years. There'd be another inquiry, wouldn't there? And they'd delay it.
Well, it is interesting, isn't it, that we knew that this was definitively a scandal in 2019. That's when the ruling came out that the computer had messed up. And we can talk about the 20 years before that, till the cows come home, but at that point, really, there should have been swift action. And there just wasn't. We're 5 years on from that ruling now.
I mean, I think one of the problems is that the turnover of ministers in government, and if you'd had somebody who'd been Postal Affairs Minister, say, for 5 years instead of 18 months or 2 years, which is the sort of the general ration, maybe somebody would have got more of a grip on this. And somebody in Downing Street should have got a grip on it. But the trouble, of course, is that they were coping with huge immediate problems like Brexit and then, of course, COVID. And to actually go in and say, well, actually, I also think we need to deal with the sub-postmasters, everybody's going to say, well, we can leave that one. And anyway, this inquiry or that, whatever, hasn't reported yet. But as to whether your question about whether it's right, by the way, to exonerate everybody, I think it is right. You asked that at the beginning. Because you can't start messing around saying, well, this guy here may actually have stolen money, really. I mean, the criminal justice system is full of places and cases where people get the benefit of the doubt and they are not prosecuted or they are acquitted. And in this case, I think you've got to acquit them all, even if it does involve one or two wrong-uns.
Well, I think the Post Office Minister has said it's not foolproof, but it is proportionate.
Well, there's a very famous legal dictum, better that one guilty man goes free or 10 guilty men go free than one innocent man goes to prison. And that, I think, applies here. But another aspect of it, look at the people who are appointed as CEOs of Fujitsu or chairman, all politically connected people. So this is the way the political class, the blob, particularly since 2010, just bungs nice chairmanships and positions to its friends, its family members.
Well, the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan's husband, held a position at Fujitsu.
And there are others. I'm really
but
not
he says
making
he knew nothing about this.
No, absolutely. He denies any wrongdoing.
Which seems a bit odd to me, but...
Well, I suppose that the service Fujitsu applied to the post office in the 90s is probably quite a small part of that business's overall...
well, that's because they've got so many other government contracts. That is very where the focus is now.
Don't tell me that a politically ambitious family, and it's a very rising, successful political couple there, and I'm not getting into it because there are Labour people involved as well, they don't read Private Eye, they don't read the papers. Come on. I mean, I can't believe there wasn't a single breakfast in that particular household where the missus said to the hubby, darling, are you going into work today? Just have a sniff around about Fujitsu and the post office, will you?
It does seem extraordinary that there are certain positions that almost guarantee trinkets and medals simply for having held the position. Paula Venables got her CBE, now handed back, of course, although I'm given to understand you can't technically hand it back.
But, not unless the monarch says.
No, it's only the king that can decide that.
Technically, she still has it.
Well, she can post it back if she wants, but Paula Venables, was she seen to have done something amazing at the time, or was this an automatic honour just by holding a big public position?
And also, who's that in the picture with Paula Venables as well? There's all these people that are in these pictures with her that I think are connected, were part of the post office.
And that she's become a bit of a scapegoat.
And she's become a bit of a scapegoat.
The people, I think, also deserve some focus. Well, first of all, I think Sunak should insist that the CEO of Fujitsu worldwide come to London and explain himself and explain why the government should carry on giving Fujitsu any contracts whatsoever, for a start, and then and demand how much he's going to contribute, his company's going to contribute to the compensation. But second, I think the focus should be also on the non-executive directors of this company, some of whom are quite distinguished people. And non-executive directors are independent people from outside, put in there by the government to keep an eye on the company, on the post office, not Fujitsu, the post office. Were they asking, did they not read Private Eye? Did they not go to board meetings and say, look, these articles, week after week after week in Private Eye, surely, you know...
Tell you what, Ian Hislop's going to be very happy about the publicity he's getting this afternoon,
quite rightly too, because they deserve really good campaign medals for this. Computer Weekly got there slightly before, I think, but it took them about 5 years.
But I suppose
the drama.
Fewer people sitting around the cabinet table, or indeed the non-executive director table of the post office, probably read Computer Weekly, I would imagine.
But Private Eye, and somebody should be pointing it out to them. You know, I think this applies to a lot of the scandals that go on, you know, in the health service, for instance, we're getting scandal after scandal after scandal. What are the non-executive directors of those trusts doing? Did they have an inkling of the scandal going on, or did they not ask the right questions? There are ways in which this can all be improved and governance can be improved.
Let's turn that to Dennis. What should we learn from this? How can we actually improve the structure of how things are done in this country so that we don't get appalling scandals like this? And it feels like we've had so many of these scandals in the last 20, 30 years.
Personally, I would say you must devolve down to a lower level a lot of the sort of supervision of these bodies, because in the local areas they will know what's going on, but the guy sitting in a glass skyscraper in the city hasn't the faintest idea. In general, a much better press. I contrast literally the Mont Blanc, Chamonix Mont Blanc, mountain high articles on people arriving on little rubber boats, a tiny number that have obsessed us for the last 2 or 3 years. And we've done terminal damage almost to many ministers, to Mr. Sunak, and the tiny amount of coverage for this, which is a genuine human scandal involving British citizens. And
it's when you hear how their lives have been impacted.
Ghastly.
It's not just the prison sentence, it's their livelihoods absolutely destroyed. I mean, the gentleman we were just talking to a few minutes ago reckons he's lost, what, he said 7 figures.
7 figures. Had to move out of the area.
18-month prison
walk down
sentence?
the street without people. I mean, postmasters
kids being bullied at school. Their kids being... Because these people, postmasters, are pillars of the community and known by everybody, looked up to by everybody. And they've had to take their children out of schools and move school, and all dreadful things happen, which is unquantifiable in financial terms. I think the other thing that we need to put even more thought into in this country is how we take whistleblowers more seriously, and how we make the mechanism, because whistleblowers don't often come forwards because often they end up losing their jobs or having reprisals against them. And there must have been people inside Post Office and Fujitsu who could have come forward and didn't.
Well, we'll be talking more about this in the next hour. Michael Crick, Dennis McShane, thanks for joining us here on The Sofas. Much more to come here on Good Afternoon Britain. That's after this.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Dry for many of us today, sunniest in the south, a lot of cloud elsewhere, and it will continue to feel cold, especially in the south where we've got this easterly wind and cold air imported from the continent. Further north, lighter winds with high pressure nearby, but a lot of cloud coming into northern and eastern Scotland, southern Scotland as well, northern and eastern England. And here there will be some showers, rain at lower levels, some snow over the hills, but mostly these showers are light, 1 or 2 showers for Wales as well. But otherwise, western Scotland, southern and southeast England seeing the best of any sunshine, and wherever you are, it will feel cold, 5, 6 Celsius at best. Some places staying at 1 to 3 Celsius with that biting in wind from the east affecting southern areas. And we'll continue to see that overnight. Clear skies in the south leading to a widespread frost once again, temperatures dipping to -1 or -2 Celsius fairly widely. Western Scotland also seeing a touch of frost because of clear skies here, but elsewhere where we've got the cloud, well, it's going to stay frost-free across parts of East Wales into northern and eastern England, eastern Scotland as well. Fewer showers around on Thursday. In fact, after 1 or 2 showers first thing, it mostly becomes dry by the afternoon. Increasing amounts of sunshine across much of Scotland, less sunshine.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel. Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Wednesday, the 10th of January.
Justice at last. The Prime Minister announces a new law will swiftly exonerate and compensate hundreds of postmasters wrongly convicted in Britain's greatest miscarriage of justice. But how soon will it come?
Mr. Nobody. The Labour leader accuses Rishi Sunak of flip-flopping over the government's Rwanda plan ahead of next week's dramatic showdown. The Prime Minister hit back, accusing Sir Keir of prioritising people smugglers ahead of the British people. We'll speak to a Tory MP.
And the Arctic blast beds in. This cold weather is not over yet. More snow, frost and freezing temperatures are expected into next week, with the Met Office warning of wintry hazards ahead.
Now, we were mentioning, of course, we've mentioned ad nauseum Paula Venables, the former boss of the Post Office, who, of course, handed back the CEO. But who's the chap next to her?
Yes, we have been asking this question because we've shown this picture so much. That is Tim Parker, multimillionaire, former chairman of the Post Office, who resigned a week before the inquiry into the Horizon scandal opened. And I think it's important to mention because every time we see that photograph, we talk about Paula Venables. But there are so many questions to be asked of other people too.
Indeed, people who might have conveniently resigned at particularly convenient moments. This scandal goes on. And we'll be getting to all of that, Rwanda and indeed the weather. But all of that is to come after your latest headlines with Sam.
Tom, thank you very much. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom. The headlines at 2. Well, our top story this hour, the post office workers caught in the Horizon IT scandal will have their convictions overturned just by signing one document. Postal Services Minister Kevin Hollinrake says the new emergency legislation may take some weeks to deliver, but he insists it is a priority for the government. We're hearing there'll also be an upfront payment of £75,000 to compensate the sub-postmasters who were jailed or bankrupted as a result of the flawed IT computer software. Mr Hollinrake says the victims will get the justice they deserve.
We intend to bring forward legislation as soon as we can to overturn the convictions of all those convicted in England or Wales on the basis of post office evidence given during the Horizon scandal. The government will, in the coming days, consider whether to include the small number of cases that have already been considered by the appeal courts and the convictions upheld.
Well, meanwhile, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has said that Rishi Sunak has been caught red-handed, opposing his own Rwanda plan. It comes as the Prime Minister is braced for a common showdown over his flagship scheme after being warned by some Conservative MPs that it won't work unless it's significantly strengthened. During the first Prime Minister's questions of 2024, Keir Starmer referenced reports that Rishi Sunak wanted to scale back the government's Rwanda scheme when he was Chancellor.
£400 million of taxpayer money down the drain, no one sent to Rwanda, small boats still coming. It's hardly a surprise he wanted to scrap the scheme when he was trying to sneak in as Tory leader. But he's been caught red-handed opposing the very thing that he's now made his flagship policy. Which member should we listen to? The one before us today or the one who used to believe in something?
Well, in response, the Prime Minister accused Labour of being against any deterrent.
You do need to have an effective deterrence to finally solve this problem. In fact, the National Crime Agency agree that you need, in their words, an effective removals and deterrence agreement. And that's why, after becoming Prime Minister, I negotiated a new deal with Albania, thanks to which we have seen a 93% drop in illegal arrivals from Albania. That's how Australia stopped the boats. That's why Italy, Germany and Austria are all looking at similar schemes. He's the only one who's opposed to a proper deterrent.
Well, today we've learned that the UK has helped to repel the largest ever attack by Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in the Red Sea. Overnight, HMS Diamond, along with the US, successfully destroyed multiple attack drones. No crew on that warship have been injured, and they haven't suffered any damage. The Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, says the attacks are completely unacceptable, and he's warned there will be consequences. The Yemeni militants have been targeting ships in the region in support of Hamas in its war with Israel. Here in the UK, half of child sexual abuse cases reported to police in 2022 were crimes committed by children. That's according to data gathered by police in England and Wales. Half of the offences involved a child aged 10 to 17 as either a suspect or perpetrator in what the force called a growing and concerning trend. The figures are up from a third in 2013. The estimated cost of building HS2 between London and Birmingham has soared to as much as £66.6 billion. The chairman of the project, Sir John Thompson, told MPs the increase is due to original budgets being too low, changes to the scope of the project, poor delivery and inflation. In 2013, HS2 was estimated to cost £37.5 billion. That was for the entire planned network, including the now scrapped sections from Birmingham to Manchester and Leeds. Well, the world's first ever pothole-preventing robot is set to hit the roads in Hertfordshire after its successful test rollout. The machines are called Errors Prevent and can identify and classify potholes using artificial intelligence. It can then automatically fill in the holes to keep out water, which would otherwise seep through the surface, causing more damage. If successful, the machine could save time and money to identify potholes and reduce the disruption they cause to motorists. And the Princess Royal has been welcomed to Sri Lanka with a traditional dance display. Princess Anne is visiting South Asia with her husband to mark 75 years of diplomatic relations with the country. During the 3-day visit, the Princess will meet the country's President and First Lady, and she will also undertake engagements and meet local communities and faith groups in the capital, Colombo. That's the latest from the GB Newsroom. For more, we're on TV, digital radio and on our smart speaker, your smart speaker rather. Just say play GB News. Now, though, it's back to Tom and Pip.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 7 minutes past 2, and we'll be returning to our lead story on the Horizon IT scandal as Sunak says new legislation will be introduced to exonerate victims. But first, let's talk about another issue covered during Prime Minister's questions, which is, of course, Sunak's flagship Rwanda bill, due to be debated next week for 2 days in the House of Commons.
Well, joining us now is Conservative MP for Stoke-on-Trent North, Jonathan Gullis. Good afternoon to you, Jonathan. Sir Keir Starmer really went for Rishi Sunak at PMQs over this Rwanda scheme, calling him Mr. Nobody, who is scared of his own MPs. Is Rishi Sunak scared of you?
I think Sir Keir Starmer was actually busy talking about himself. And as for the idea of flip-flopping, I couldn't believe the irony when I heard that. This is Sir Keir Starmer, the man who campaigned on 10 pledges to be leader of the Labour Party, then ditched every single one of them since becoming that leader. The man who called Jeremy Corbyn a friend, who's now trying to pretend that they never were. A man who has said that he would surrender our borders to his buddies in Brussels and move it to the Mediterranean and allow 100,000 plus illegal migrants who have come to through the Mediterranean into the UK, putting more pressure on school places, more pressure on the NHS, and cost even more to put even more people in hotels. That man is a charlatan. That man is clearly just saying things in order to try and grab a cheap headline. The Prime Minister has been working diligently to make sure that we do everything we can to stop the boats, and has had huge success with the Albania scheme, a 93% drop in Albanians. We've seen a drop of 1/3 of actual arrivals over 2023. But of course, I want to make sure that this important piece of legislation does work. We've suggested some amendments that we think are within scope of the red lines the Prime Minister laid, that will mean the Rwandan government won't run away from the deal, that will be within the scope of international law, and that means we can deliver on that important pledge to stop the boats. The Conservative Party is the only party in Parliament that is serious about stopping them.
Now, Jonathan, it's true that Sir Keir Starmer had, of course, abandoned those 10 pledges on which he stood to be leader. But you mentioned there a number, 100,000 migrants. The Labour Party very much strongly deny that that is their policy. It seems to be a number that Conservative campaign headquarters has come up with. The Labour Party has never committed to a number of illegal migrants it would want to take in.
Tom, I'm talking about the comments that Sir Keir Starmer gave as he was touring around Europe with his best buddy Yvette Cooper, who, as we know, is very keen to see small boats arrivals when she was holding up a sign saying refugees welcome. This is the reality of what we're facing here, that he was willing to do a deal in an EU quota sharing scheme that means we would have, as part of that deal, to take people into this country from other parts of Europe who have arrived on European shores illegally. Those are just facts that Sir Keir Starmer can't run away from. And ultimately what we're making very clear is that it's the Conservative Party who, as I say, with working with the French in part, with obviously the Albania deal, with obviously this Rwanda legislation, are doing everything that they can. And I know this firsthand because the Prime Minister has worked with me to make sure that one of our hotels in Stoke-on-Trent is one of the first 50 that will see it close. That means that we'll be able to get it back to its proper use, directly opposite our railway station, a gateway to our great city, as well as obviously taking financial pressures off our local authority at a particular time when budgets are squeezed. This is the reality. But as I say, the amendments that we've laid, and I think it's important to stress that the two central tenets of our amendments are to make it the default position to ignore these pyjama injunctions, these Rule 39 orders, and to stop the merry-go-round of individual claims by agreeing with the Prime Minister that Rwanda is safe, but saying that individuals will not be able to claim that they personally would not be safe in Rwanda, and it's simply about whether or not someone's fit to fly. If we can get those amendments agreed by the government, we will get lots of people off the ground in the UK over to Rwanda, deliver this partnership, set the bar for the world, and I'm sure we'll see many other safe third countries come forward wishing to take part in the scheme.
But the reality is there's not going to be that many people who end up going to Rwanda on these flights. And what I also want to just ask you is, If you're unsuccessful in these amendments, how tempted are you to then side with Labour to actually defeat the whole bill?
So to your original question, if I may, the first one, let's be honest, we're talking about scaling up how many people will be able to send to Rwanda. And again, the rest of the world is looking at this Rwanda partnership, and there are deals to be done with other safe third countries in other parts of the world if we can make this scheme work. So I have no doubt that we'll be able to very quickly scale up once we can demonstrate what we're doing. In terms of how I'll vote, I'll be perfectly frank. Obviously, I'm working day and night now with my colleagues, Danny Kruger and Miriam Cates, excellent co-chairs of the New Conservatives, as well as Simon Clarke and Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman, to get the government to adopt these amendments. And we're delighted to have over 30 people so far sign it. We hope we'll see more names in the coming days ahead, so that we can show that we have a really big feeling on the backbenches of the Conservative Party. And then, once those amendments, we've gone through committee stage, we've gone through report stage, we see what the bill looks like by the time it comes to third reading. That is when I will have to make a decision, but only then will I make that decision, when I see the bill in that state.
So is there a chance you could side with Labour to defeat the whole bill ultimately?
I'm making it very clear that I promise you all options are on the table, and I will wait to see what the bill looks like as and when it returns for third reading once it's gone through the committee and report stage.
Wow, that is stark. And just finally, Jonathan Gullis, are you at all concerned about what the Rwanda government has said about this bill, putting warnings, frankly, before members of Parliament that if the bill goes much further and becomes more ambiguous with regard to how it interacts with international obligations, the Rwandan side of this could face pulling out of this deal altogether? Is that a concern for you?
Well, you'll appreciate, Tom, that I was probably quite sceptical when I heard this comment made, but of course I want to make sure that we take that threat, as it may be, seem to others, seriously. So what we've done in drafting these amendments is had legal experts and lawyers help us draft them, that we have got legal advice from a very high esteeming KC, a former Attorney General of Northern Ireland, who has said that he believes that the amendments are within the scope of international law. They are also, therefore, not going to spook the Rwandan government, and because the arguments around international law are there. But we're keen to also have this debate about international law, to be perfectly frank, as well, because to my mind, it should not be that international law supersedes the sovereignty of our Parliament when it comes to the fact that we as MPs are here to serve the British people, have control of our borders, and as well as make sure that we have the nation's security at heart. And I think we're seeing many nations across Europe have that very same debate and discussion too. So we're very confident that this is within the scope of international law. It's met the Prime Minister's red lines that he set for us. We therefore hope that he can send that to the Rwandan government, the amendments that we've laid that are public, to see what their views are on it and feed that back to us. But ultimately, I believe they should adopt these. This will not harm that deal, and we will be able, as I say, to get people off the ground as soon as possible.
Well, Jonathan Gullis, it's shaping up to be an impressive showdown next week. We look forward to seeing that debate, that healthy debate on the green benches. Thank you very much for sharing your plans with us here on GB News.
Now, let's return to our top story, the Horizon IT scandal, after the Prime Minister announced within the last couple of hours a new law which will exonerate post office victims and quash their convictions.
The Prime Minister said people wrongly convicted in the Horizon scandal will be swiftly exonerated and compensating, calling the scandal one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history.
It comes as the former post office boss, Paula Venables, bows to huge public pressure to give up her CBE. She is standing there with Tim Parker, who is former chairman of the post office. She is now facing calls to return £3 million in bonuses.
Well, let's cross to Downing Street and speak to our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. And Catherine, break down precisely what the government has announced today.
Yes. So, first of all, they are bringing forward legislation. It will be brought to Parliament in the coming weeks. And twofold what it's going to do. First of all, it's going to quash these hundreds of wrongful convictions of postmasters, and the other thing it's going to do is it's going to speed up the compensation process. Now, the government have said that they hope that the intention all of the convictions to be quashed this year. And in terms of compensation, those that have been convicted looking at about £600,000. And the GLO group, that's the Group Litigation Orders cohort, that was the group of postmasters led by Alan Bates that really played such a crucial role in bringing this scandal to light. They didn't have convictions, but they were still out of pocket and had terrible experiences. They are to be given an upfront payment of £75,000. Now, there has been some concern that there might be a tiny number of these postmasters that actually are guilty, and the government has said that they accept that possibility. They're going to ask people to sign a piece of paper, pledging that they haven't committed these alleged crimes, leaving the way open to possible charges at a later date if it turns out that they are. Some postmasters had wanted their cases dealt with individually. The government has simply said that that is not possible. They've been fighting for justice for many years. This way, it means that those convictions can finally be quashed, payments can finally be made. Now, in terms of who is going to pay the bill, that is not clear. But what is clear is the government have clearly said there's a public inquiry. If Fujitsu, the providers of this software tech, are ultimately found to be culpable, it sounds like the government is leaving the way open to pursue them to pay the costs.
Well, Catherine, thank you very much for talking us through what has been announced in a pretty extraordinary day in the House of Commons.
Let's talk to a victim of the post office scandal. Really grateful to Pauline Stonehouse, who's joined us this afternoon. Thank you, Pauline, for your time. Now, from what I understand, you lost your home after being wrongfully convicted. Just tell us what happened.
Yeah, I was suspended after an investigation in 2007, convicted in 2008. And yeah, the consequences of that was that I was made bankrupt, lost my business, and made homeless with 2 children.
Like a really tough time that you've had, but I suppose this is one of the worst things is how many people have gone through such similar experiences. What was your reaction listening to the words of Kevin Hollinrake, the Post Office Minister, announcing that finally there will be this blanket exoneration?
I was surprised, but also really happy about it, because the more of us will get our convictions overturned, the better. And if this is a quicker way of doing it, by doing it all in one go, then that will speed the process up, yes.
Mm. And your conviction, I understand it, Pauline, was overturned in 2022. How much, if any, compensation have you had so far?
It was overturned in 2021, actually, November. And as for compensation, I haven't received all of it. Yes, I've received some, but not the main part of it, no.
Mm. Are you at all concerned with one of the concerns that people have been raising this week particularly about the measure of blanket exoneration? You, of course, had your case individually looked at, exonerated under scrutiny. There is some concern that there might be, by doing this blanket measure as opposed to looking at cases individually as yours has been looked at, people might slip through the net and potentially there might be, amongst the many hundreds of wrongfully accused people, some bad apples.
Yes, of course, that is potential for that to happen, because not everybody is innocent, or guilty, should I say. But I think that's a risk they've got to take, I think, because the process otherwise will take so long individually that it's got to be done in a fairer way.
I think Kevin Hollinrake said it was not foolproof, this new system, but it was proportionate. Will anything ever make up for what you've gone through, Pauline? I mean, what impact has it had on your life, on your health?
I don't think any amount of money or any amount of apologies or any amount of prosecutions that may come on the back of this to find out who's responsible because my health, I don't think, will ever be the same. They say stress can bring out and cause many things. I myself have been through breast cancer in the last 5 years. How do I know the stress of it all hasn't brought that on? I lost my parents in the process of all of this, and they never saw my innocence being proved.
Oh dear.
I don't think anything will ever make up for that. It'll always be in the back of my mind. No matter, does it matter that I've been found innocent and had my conviction quashed, because the damage has been done already.
And Pauline, when you were watching the ITV docudrama, that must have been very triggering for you in a way. Yes, you're pleased that the story has now been told, the true story has been told to millions of people, but what effect did it have on you watching it?
My husband and I watched them all in one go on the first night. We watched all 4 episodes. I found it very distressing. It brought back loads of bad memories. I was reliving sitting in my own post office, checking and rechecking everything. The storylines were so similar to mine. I cried and I screamed and I shouted and left the room on a few occasions because I was so upset and didn't want to show how upset I was to my husband. It's brought back too many bad memories, and subsequently because of that and the follow-up to it, it's been difficult to sleep because I'm thinking about it all the time.
Of course you are, of course you are. And if there's one question you could ask now, what would it be?
I don't know, to be honest. I think for ministers, and especially for the Prime Minister as well, is that he does what he says he's going to do, and can he honestly do it quickly enough to solve it all and put us in a better position again.
Well, we'll keep a keen eye on the progress of this legislation, emergency legislation. The government says it wants to deliver as soon as possible. But for now, Pauline Stonehouse, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and talking through this big day in the course of this scandal.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Oh, we wish Pauline all the very best. Hopefully, she is now starting to see the wheels of justice turn, finally.
Well, coming up, we'll have the latest on the Red Sea crisis, asking, can the UK stop these Iran-backed Houthi raids on our goods trying to get to the UK? Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. The crisis in the Red Sea is deepening as the UK and US repel the largest ever attack by Iranian-backed Houthi rebels.
Well, posting on social media, the Defence Secretary Grant Shapps says that Royal Naval Air Defence destroyer HMS Diamond shot down multiple attack drones heading for commercial vessels. Luckily, there were no injuries or damage to the Diamond or her crew.
Well, joining us with more on this is our security editor, Mark White. How significant then, Mark, is this latest development here?
Well, there's no doubt this is a worrying escalation, as you mentioned in the introduction. The single biggest launch of drones in months, really, since the Houthi started firing these drones and missiles towards what they say are commercial ships.
Then goes to the Home Office blob,
linked
nothing
to Israel. And they say that, but I think some of the vessels that have been linked to Israel are very tenuous links indeed. So some real concern going forward about just how this might escalate. We got a warning from the US and the UK last week saying that there would be potentially military action against the Houthi rebels if they continued with those missile and drone strikes. Well, there's apart from a slight lull over the weekend in which there were a few smaller, lower-level attacks, it seems now that we've got this very significant attack. Grant Shapps is warning that if they continue, then there will be action. This is what he said a little earlier.
We have, I'm afraid, failed to heed the warnings issued on the 3rd of January. We seem to see a drop-off after that by a number of different countries, including the UK and the US, for them to stop and to cease this action. But I'm afraid last night proved they really are not listening. If this doesn't stop, then action will be taken. So I'm afraid that I suppose the simplest thing is to say, watch this space.
Well, of course, worryingly for the British and other naval assets out in that area, it wasn't just, it seems, commercial shipping that was targeted. According to the Defence Secretary, some of those attack drones were headed straight for HMS Diamond. It took out 7 of the 18 attack drones. 3 missiles were also launched as well. And participating alongside HMS Diamond was the US aircraft carrier Dwight D. Eisenhower, as well as 3 other US vessels. So we await to see what will happen in light of this fresh warning now from Grant Shapps. No indication yet that there is an imminent attack on Houthi positions that are planned, but it's probably unlikely that we would get any indication beforehand. They'll strike when they deem the time is right and when they've had enough of what they see as the Houthi escalations.
Mark, if these Houthi rebels, these Iran-backed Houthi rebels, have fired their drones directly at British Royal Naval vessels, is that not an act of war?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt it is a very significant escalation, and it's not the first strike that has, at the very least, been aimed in the vicinity of other coalition vessels. US vessels have come under, they say, a direct line of fire from these drones and missiles as well, and they've taken their defensive measures to take out these drones and these missiles with a view to also, of course, protecting the commercial shipping there. So yes, it's an escalation. The Houthi rebels are continuing, knowing that it is a flagrant escalation here. The ball is now in the court, if you like, of the US, the UK and other coalition partners. In the words of Grant Shapps, though, watch this space. Well, we're watching.
Wow, really, really stark. Could we be dragged into yet another war in the Middle East? I suppose that's the question on everyone's lips. Mark White, thank you very much for bringing us all the very latest in concerning developments in the Red Sea.
Plenty more to come, including the news that London, in a study, has been found to be the slowest city in the world. How slow is it where you live? That's all to come after your headlines with Sam.
Pip and Tom, thank you very much. Good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. I'm Sam Francis. The headlines are just after 2:30. Post office workers have been caught up in the Horizon scandal, but they will have their convictions overturned just by signing one document. Postal Services Minister Kevin Hollinrake says new emergency legislation may take some weeks to deliver, but he insists it is a priority for the government. There'll also be an upfront payment of £75,000 to compensate the sub-postmasters who were jailed or bankrupted as a result of the flawed computer software. Vijay Parekh was a victim of the scandal.
All the people who are involved in this get the same treatment we have had, all this convicted postmasters, and let them feel how we felt. We've done nothing and we've been imprisoned. They have done something, so they need to be imprisoned for the reason what they've done.
Meanwhile, the Defence Secretary says the UK has helped repel the largest ever attack by Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in the Red Sea. Overnight, HMS Diamond, along with the US, successfully destroyed multiple attack drones. No crew on the warship have been injured, and they haven't suffered any damage. Grant Shapps says the attacks are completely unacceptable, and he warned there will be consequences. The Yemeni militants have been targeting ships in support of Hamas in its war with Israel. And violence is erupting on the streets of Ecuador, with police checkpoints and helicopters patrolling major cities. Ecuador's President Daniel Noboa has declared a state of emergency following the prison escape of one of the country's most notorious drug gang bosses. Yesterday, hooded gunmen burst into a live television studio, waving guns and wearing masks. Police say they have arrested 13 people so far. Here in the UK, the estimated cost of building HS2 between London and Birmingham has soared to as much as £66.6 billion. The chairman of the project, Sir John Thompson, told MPs the increase is due to original budgets being too low, changes to the scope of the project, poor delivery and inflation. In 2013, HS2 was estimated to cost £37.5 billion. That was for the entire planned network, including the now scrapped sections from Birmingham to Manchester and Leeds. For more on all of those stories and many more, you can visit our website, gbnews.com.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Welcome back to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch about the biggest story of the day, which is, of course, that extraordinary blanket compensation and update to exoneration that was announced by the Post Office Minister this afternoon.
Elizabeth, good afternoon. You say, for me, those who are in positions of power and those in Fujitsu should be hit in the pocket hard, losing all pension rights, any opportunity to get jobs in other organisations, so that they feel real financial deprivation.
Yeah, there's a bit of a lust for retribution.
Well, for vengeance, which is understandable.
Yeah. Eye for an eye. Peter has written in to say that Mr Bates gave over 20 years of his life, also his wife too, to campaign against misjudgment by the Post Office. Surely he should be put forward for a knighthood.
He was offered an OBE, I think it was, certainly an honour, and he refused to take it because Paula Venables was given a CBE at the time, and he refused to accept it. But maybe that all changes now that she's returning it.
Yes, or at least has attempted to return it. Dave has written in to say that Paula Venables should also be defrocked. Paula Venables is an ordained Anglican priest, but she stepped back from any major role in 2021. But I suppose she could still be defrocked if Archbishop Welby wants to get involved.
Well, it's come out in the last 24 hours or so that she was in the running to be Bishop of London.
Gosh.
So that's all interesting, because I do wonder, you know, how I'd just be really interested to know about her religious faith around all this, with what she's allegedly responsible for. Interesting to get into that one, Michael.
Absolutely right.
Michael Crick, sorry, journalist and author.
She was apparently, according to the story yesterday, she was in the last 3 to be the Bishop of London, which is, the third most important position in the Church of England. Bishops of London often go on to be Archbishop of Canterbury, and they were fast-tracking women at the time, women who'd had distinguished careers somewhere else, had become ordained and would get moving on faster in the Church of England than they would
Imagine
be if they were men.
it's quite a small pool within which to fish.
But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, if she is really a committed Christian and a moral person, and one has to take that at face value, I think, then she should be really. She should spend the rest of her life, I think, making up for this. She should sell her, no doubt, large house.
Return her bonuses.
Use the bonus. Use what wealth she has accumulated, what savings she has, beyond a minimum to live on, and you spend the rest of her life trying to correct the wrongs that have occurred in this scandal. And there are wrongs in this scandal that cannot be corrected very easily, such as the distress to people's families, and the family breakdown. The mental illness. She should go around the country meeting every single one of those
But not just her, surely. Surely, former Labour MP Dennis McShane, good afternoon to you. Surely there would be a whole busload of people going around the country doing what Michael Crick suggested.
The ministers. I'm not going to do names. I can. The ministers, the judges who sent them to prison, the judges are supposed to examine these things independently. The whole establishment rolled over a steamroller, crushing the little people, because that is what the English, Anglican, Tory, Liberal Democrat, and yes, Labour establishment does. We live in a country where it's so difficult to get wrongs righted. The mechanism for doing it, especially with the press we have today, it's more and more difficult. I'm not quite into the sackcloth and ashes and poor Miss Venables, or Venables, whatever she's called.
What John Profumo did.
John Profumo was a very, very rich man, and yes, he went and then worked in a charity in East London. Did it set an example? Did a single minister after him start telling the truth, all the truth and nothing but truth to the House of Commons? Come on, Mike.
No, I think it did set an example, actually, in terms of decent behaviour. It showed genuine contrition on his part. And I haven't seen... I mean, she's made statements as Paula Venables about how she's deeply sorry about this, but I think she can do more than that in actually how she behaves. And handing back the CBE is the least of it. She should... basically, the gains she's made as a human being, financially and in other ways, she should change her lifestyle and be humble, go round and show she's genuine in her apologies, and also contribute to all future discussions about how institutions should be run. As for the knighthood...
Sorry, I should just say, at the moment, she's saying she will not comment publicly on anything until the end of the inquiry.
Well, I think that's absurd. I mean, other people are commenting. It's not as if this judge is going to be influenced in any way. It's not like it's a criminal trial and it's all sub judice. Of course she can comment, and it's that in itself is interesting. And I'd also be interesting to know whether she's watched the drama, by the way. Yes. As for Alan Bates, the real Alan Bates, not Toby Jones, the actor, he did an interview for Channel 4 News earlier in the week, and he was asked about the ministers and whether Ed Davey should lose his job. And actually, he said no. He felt that Ed Davey had been in all the ministers had been given a bum steer, I think was the phrase he used. And I thought there is a genuinely decent person. He's not angry. I mean, obviously, inside there is a horror as to what's happened, but he has shown he hasn't overreacted, perhaps in the way that I am, actually. And I thought there's a really... He shouldn't just... They should actually put him in the House of Lords. It would be good to have somebody like that in the House of Lords that could comment on things like this from time to time.
Not just a knighthood, but a peerage. Dennis McShane, can you one-up that? Should we join the Order of Bath?
I'm a member of the royal family. You should marry one of them, make an honest woman of one of them. No, I mean, let's be a bit realistic. I would, for example, be more concerned about the way everybody took the decision to import contaminated AIDS blood from the United States at a cheap rate in order to provide blood transfusions, some of which ended up with people being very ill and die. No one's been held to account for that. There are other examples one can give. It is a real problem. We do not know how to hold to account, how to make good. Who's been held to account for Grenfell? Hundreds of people burnt to see.
This will surely galvanise these other campaigns now.
It will. And also, I mean, the reason why I think somebody like Alan Bates should be brought into the House of Lords is that he can ask the right questions. Too often in this world, we're frightened of asking what other people will denounce as a stupid question.
And so often...
And often it's the stupid questions that actually should be asked and get to the bottom of it.
And we were talking about this sort of rotating cast of people who become heads of big public bodies and then bishops of London or whatever else it might be. Those are exactly the same rotating cast of people who've gone from politics to a public body to the clergy to whatever else it is who end up in the House.
But as a former president of the National Union of Journalists, not a distinguished one like Michael, a very undistinguished.
I was never president. I was just an ordinary member.
I was the president, political job. Is our journalism in this country completely above reproach when reporting or magnifying or making journalists decide to make something into a public issue? They've done it endlessly on boats. I'm not criticising anybody for that. But when you spend all your attention on chasing a few Albanians from hell to the high oceans, and you don't have any energy to pick up the little people, these sub-postmasters, that's a problem for Michael and I.
I think quite a few people would say that the pressures felt by illegal migration, the hotels that are taken over, it's not the Ritz, it's the small people that very often feel the biggest impacts of illegal migration to the country. I'm sure that's probably an argument that many journalists who've highlighted
I'm not
that
against
issue
highlighting it, just more generally, with so many problems. I mean, Britain is broken. I've just come back from a few days in a country called Switzerland, where everything works quite well. It's consensus. There's a slogan in Switzerland saying if it's not forbidden, it's compulsory.
So much consensus that they don't even have a prime minister.
Indeed.
You should go and live there, Dennis. Let's instead of talking about Switzerland, let's move on to the Red Sea, because this story about this Houthi attack in the Red Sea, which was repelled by US and UK warships, there's a deepening crisis going on there, Michael.
There is, and it's frightening. I mean, Iran is not far off getting nuclear weapons. It doesn't appear to have them now, but it could be a few years down the road, and I don't know what the answer is, because we can't just stand by and allow these rebels to attack commercial shipping.
Or indeed our own naval vessels.
Indeed, and we are economically hugely dependent on the ships going through the Red Sea.
And this is what we need to make clear to people about why this matters. It's not a case of, oh, this is going on over there in the Red Sea. This really does impact on us, Dennis.
It can very directly, for example, where everybody's pleased inflation's coming down a bit, not so much for food inflation, but it's going in the right direction. So much of what we buy in terms of food, of finished products from China, all comes through the Red Sea, and it's got the potential to make prices for everything in the whole of Europe, not just the UK. It's been running as a story. The French Navy's been involved, bumping these, shooting down these drones for 2 or 3 months. The US big time and actually attacking the boats. Royal Navy seems to have been involved a little bit. I was very worried to read last week that we're selling 10 frigates. We're now the smallest Royal Navy since Napoleonic times. That worries me deeply because nobody's taking defence seriously in this country.
Or indeed this continent.
To a large extent in this continent, indeed. So these are devout, if I may use that phrase, we talk a lot about religion this afternoon, Islamist believers who want to see the elimination of Jews from the face of the earth. We're not taking that seriously. And we've got a huge cauldron in the Middle East. We've got no working democracy. OK, there are elections in Israel. I don't think Bibi Netanyahu conforms to anybody's idea of a democratic prime minister. And all of this spills over. It's dividing our own streets, the anger in the streets from different communities and everywhere else in Europe. And we're not finding solutions.
But what is the solution? Since 1945, we've assumed commercial vessels can go about without military escort. Are we now reversing back to undoing that post-war settlement that we've enjoyed and that's made us prosperous?
Let's be clear. We've always had boat kidnapping. We've always had, particularly oil tankers, taken over just by people who arrive on the same kind of boats across the Channel.
But not backed by an enormous petro state.
No, without the sophisticated missiles being delivered by Iran. But Iran is unquestionably a rogue state. Now, I don't know how somebody I think said in the 18th century, I don't know how to declare a whole people guilty of something. I don't know that you can just cut Iran off and the Chinese would go straight in and make them one of their little friends. So we're very good at starting conflicts, Iraq's and Afghanistan's and David Cameron intervening in Libya and Syria. We're absolutely rubbish at shutting them down. We've got to start closing down. And that may mean holding our nose and accepting things that the ultra-liberal writers and bien pensants, people who have this angelic world of view, the world is not a host of angels. There's some very nasty people out there. We have to get a lot tougher and work with partners against them. But I don't want to get into any other questions, but when Britain isolates itself from the rest of the world, as it did in the 1930s, bad things start happening.
But when it comes to the crisis at the heart of the Middle East, Jews against Arabs, Israel, Palestine, for decades, we'd all sit around and say, well, obviously, the solution is a two-state solution. But we are now so far removed from it, the possibility of a two-state solution.
Do you think that is dead in the water? Do you really think that's an impossibility now?
It's very difficult to see how you can remove all the Israeli settlers from the West Bank.
Sharon did it in Gaza.
Well, they in much smaller numbers than would be required. It's a much harder thing for a political leader in what is, they still have elections in Israel at pretty regular intervals. In some ways, Israel's problem is because they're too democratic. But it's so much. The idea of a two-state solution is so much harder to envisage than it was 10 or 20 years ago.
And the tragedy of this all was that we were in a space before the events of October where the Saudis were about to recognise Israel. Things were moving in a good direction, the Abraham Accords and all of that. There's so much more to talk about, but I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us on Good Afternoon Britain. We'll be back, of course, tomorrow from 12.
Martin Daubney.
Oh.
Yes, Martin Daubney's up next. Bye-bye.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, it's Aidan McKibben here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's feeling cold out there today. There are some sunny skies around, but otherwise a lot of cloud is covering the country, especially across northeastern parts. High pressure currently driving east to northeasterly winds in across the UK. Feeling cold in that wind despite the sunshine in the south, and a lot of cloud elsewhere will bring some spots of rain and drizzle to Wales, northern and eastern England, southern Scotland. That will tend to fade through the night. Clear skies in the south will lead to a frost in many places, although there will be some patchy cloud cover developing. -1 to -2 Celsius in the south. A frost also likely for western Scotland under clear spells. But elsewhere, where we've got the cloud, it's going to be a frost-free start to Thursday. Temperatures of 4 to 6 Celsius across East Wales into the Midlands, eastern England, southern and eastern Scotland. We've got less of a wind on Thursday, so perhaps not feeling quite as cold in the south. We've got a sunny start in the south, but increasingly the cloud builds from the northeast, keeping the sunshine towards the far southwest, increasing sunshine across central and western Scotland. Otherwise, a lot of cloud, but fewer showers around compared with today. Into Friday, a frosty start for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Clear skies here, generally cloudy elsewhere. And into the weekend, a big change in the weather comes along as Arctic winds arrive with snow showers for Scotland.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cake.